We are live now. Okay, I'm going to go to Facebook for a minute and share this so we get some people.
I will as well. So you'll let me know when I'm on screen, please.
You're still on the screen, and I'll be on the screen too.
Huh.
I won't be off the screen because we're on Facebook. We're just going to be sharing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to Facebook for a minute and share this. So we get some people. I'm going to go to Facebook for a minute and share this. Okay, I'm going to rely on you to share tonight because I don't mean I'm going to rely on you. I mean I'm going to rely on our friends out there to share for us because we seem to be having a few technical difficulties here, and I don't want to disturb things by going back and forth to Facebook. So, hi, everybody. I see Rob Rivera's here. Hi, Rob. And Rob says, hey, Yoda, and hi, Jeff. Sandy says, hi, Joe. Sandy says, hi, Bonnie.
Sandy Schultz?
Sandy Degg.
Oh, Degg. Hello.
Yeah. And Kay Ryan is here. Hi, Kay. Okay, my guest for tonight is Jeff Epstein, who has interviewed me before, but who is joining tonight to have a conversation with me. And we're going to be talking about MMT and the coronavirus and how they relate to each other. So I'm going to go right ahead and I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, who would like to open things up with some questions. And Jeff, by the way, is from Citizens Media TV. And he may want to give the URL of Citizens Media TV and some other information. And I'll turn it over to him. He can start with that. Then he can ask me some questions.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on again. We spoke in January of last year, so it was quite a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I have Citizens Media TV accidentally there, but I actually want to. So, Citizens Media TV on Facebook, same on Twitter. That's more my personal stuff, more Bernie, progressive stuff. But actually, I want people to know that I'm the host of Activist MMT, the podcast Activist MMT, which you can find on Facebook and Twitter as well. I just released my 19th episode, which was part 2 with you back from last January. So which you can find on Facebook and Twitter. So yeah, I wanted to start off with just how has this crisis been for you, Joe, and just to share our personal experiences of what it's been like in the past couple of weeks.
Well, we have gotten more and more careful, of course, and we are basically sheltering in place now. We go out to get some food. We cannot see our son, or our grandchildren at this point, even though they're very close to us, because it's too dangerous. I think for us as people who are fairly old, we're in our 80s right now, or actually we both are in our 80s now. Come to think of it. And so we're very limited in our scope now. And thank God for the internet,
Yeah, really.
because, of course, we have social lives through the internet. And that is a relief. That is rather excellent. Okay, Joanne says she misses her grandchildren. Rob says, I found it rather funny when people saw how fast field hospitals were being built. I told my mother about it, and she realized we can do great things. The only thing that was holding us back was the ridiculous pay for it nonsense. Indeed, the ridiculous pay for it nonsense. But,
Right.
okay, to go further, we are also limited, okay, of course, because we cannot go to restaurants anymore. Of course, we weren't going to too many restaurants anyway because our budget has been very, very limited, okay, of late. But we miss our weekly trips to Cafe Sano for an appetizer and a coffee. That was sort of a highlight of the week,
Hmm.
you might say. And
So what are you doing when you go out to get food? Like, what precautions are you taking when you go out to get, like, for example, groceries?
we wear gloves, okay, and we're taking precautions in the house because we have some disinfectant wipes. We wash our hands very frequently, and
When you say gloves, you don't necessarily mean, you mean like winter gloves, just something, you don't mean surgical gloves.
we mean surgical gloves. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, we bought some extremely light, throwaway surgical gloves at Costco. Okay, a couple of weeks ago, and we've got 400 pairs of those that we are working our way through slowly.
Hmm.
And so they protect us when we go out of the house. We wish we had but 95 types of masks, but
Wow.
we haven't been able to find those around because, of course, they're in short supply now, and even healthcare workers are not able to find that around. But we would like to get those and and wear those outside. Okay. Now we also have a little bit, okay, of danger personally. Hey, Ondine, how are you? Nice to see you here. What we're doing here now is we're living in a senior living community, active seniors, so called. And so we have a building full, okay, of seniors.
Mm.
And thus far as we know, the virus hasn't gotten into the building. But of course, we dread the day when it may get into the building, and at some point, of course, that is likely to happen. Okay,
Yeah,
but
you have to assume.
well, we're taking care not to have too much contact. We're practicing social distancing. We're being at least 6 feet away from all of, okay, our neighbors, which we all, okay, are laughing about here. But pretty people are being pretty conscientious now. I noticed. I happened to go down to get the mail earlier this evening, and I picked it up. And the mail room is very close to the coffee room here, and people would generally sit in the coffee room around the tables and have coffee very frequently. And there were a few people who were in the coffee room, but only about four, and they weren't making coffee or drinking any coffee because that was too dangerous. And they were sitting quite separately apart from each other. Some were far more than 6 feet apart. They were more like 15 feet apart, in fact. So I was glad to see that everybody was being very careful and people were cheery enough. What they do during the day sometimes is they get some coffee in the coffee room, and then they walk outside onto the porch and they sit with people in the open air. And when you're in the open air, I guess the guideline is only 3 feet away from people.
Well,
Hey, Bonnie, I have some background music from your machine. Thank you. You sure did. Well, I don't know. I
uh,
just heard some music coming out. Okay, anyway, regardless
uh,
of that, that's the
uh,
situation we have had here. And so
well,
we're living with it. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
And we're living with it, from day to day. And okay, it helps to be a very happy couple. We're very happy together. And so, we're enjoying our company. And so
Well,
that's a good thing.
especially, over 60, that is definitely the most precarious, you're the most vulnerable to being hit hard by this. So, obviously I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. Joanne just said in the comments, change your clothes and take a shower when you get home from shopping, and she's absolutely right. So I understand that, like, when I go shopping, I haven't gone out of the house yet since this has started. Obviously, I have to go get groceries or whatever. Um, I'm going to just wear regular gloves, like winter or whatever, but just wash them when I get home. But the moment that you get home, as Joanne just said here, you need to not sit down. You need to take your clothes and put them right in the wash. You need to go straight to the shower. But also, I'm thinking of, like, what do I do with the groceries? Like, some I shop at BJ's and ShopRite for our groceries mostly, and they both deliver. But excuse me, do I want them to deliver? Because if that means extra people that are going to be taking it off the shelves, putting it in the truck, taking it from the truck, putting it. So do I want that, or do I want to go and eliminate a few pieces of this, chain of people? So I think what I'm going to be doing is going to the store and just, bringing alcohol and wipes, and just wiping down the cart and wiping down the packages, and telling the person at the checkout, I don't want you to touch it. You can scan
What
it. I'll
we
hold them,
do is we bring wipes, and sometimes we bring some sanitizer with us also. And we haven't been taking a shower when we come home, but we wash our hands, okay, extremely well. And when we go into the store, we've been very covered up. In other words, with jackets, okay, things like that. So our shirts are not exposed to, any possible viruses, okay, or anything like that. So far we felt safe in, simply washing our hands very well. Perhaps
well,
we
that's good.
should be taking a second shower.
I mean, certainly if you sit down on something or whatever, but this is just what I've heard, and I'm just like, I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I should be nervous, but um,
Yeah, you should be
uh,
nervous, and you have some children, don't you?
I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. My wife is I mean, well, it doesn't matter right now. I was about to say my wife is a teacher, which during normal situation is more precarious. I work in a school. She works in a school. I'm an assistant. She is a second grade teacher. My boys both go to two different schools in this district. And I wanted, so during school, they use Google Classroom, and I think during normal school situation, I don't think that's a good thing. Like, I want more personal human interaction. I don't like the fact that there's computers on these kids' desks. But setting that aside, during this crisis where you can't be in school and you can't have that human interaction, Google Classroom has been a saving grace for two reasons. Number one, um, my wife still has a full-time job, even though she's not in her physical school. That's amazing. She works, normal school day. She communicates with her children through Google Classroom and other tools and so on. And that has really changed things, because it gives us, number one, it gives us structure. And number two, it gives us and all these kids structure, and those families structure for their day. And she's still being paid. So that's a real blessing. That's a real
Yeah, that's
blessing.
a real blessing, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I
Oh,
haven't gone
we, of
out yet at
course, are
all.
being paid as well after fashion because we're on Social Security.
There you go.
So,
But I
fortunately,
just can't imagine. I just can't imagine. I don't know the suffering that's going on out there, but obviously it's going on. Like my local diner. Um, just a quick aside, we call it Maggie's Restaurant. It's called the New Maple Hill, and but the waitress that almost always serves us is called Maggie. So my family, my boys call it Maggie's Restaurant. So Maggie's Restaurant, restaurants being opened is just not a good thing anymore. It's just not. And finally today, as of actually 9 o'clock tonight, which just right when we started, the New Jersey Governor Murphy officially closed down all non-essential businesses for the next month at least. Um, and so I want to talk to the owner of this restaurant, who I've actually done a number of my podcast interviews in her restaurant. We go there quite a lot. I want to talk with her. I want to talk with their a couple of the waitresses that we know, and to see what it's like for them, because I mean, they make $2 an hour or whatever it is for tipped workers. And how, even if they get unemployment, they're going to get unemployment based on $2 an hour. I mean,
I
how
know that's
how
ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
I mean, it's and I just learned on the Bernie Sanders thing last night, I think it was, on Bernie Sanders coronavirus town hall last night, that $2 an hour is actually a legacy of slavery.
Yes, I
That
know. I heard that too. I watched that as well.
Yeah,
That was
so that woman
amazing.
said, yeah, Reconstruction, they wanted to hire black service staff, and they said, you're not going to get anything, you'll just work for tips. And of course, all their customers are, how many of their customers are racist? So how many tips are they going to actually get? And then at whatever point, I don't know when, it changed to $2 an hour, like that's dignity or something. But yeah, so it's certainly been an interesting couple of weeks. So we just shut down as of 9 o'clock tonight,
Oh, we
our
have to
state.
be precise around here. So we have to note that it's $2.13 an hour. Jeff?
Oh, well, that's totally, I thought it was only 2 and 213. Clearly, why are they complaining?
I'm sorry. It was a bad joke, but
I mean,
it's a bad rate.
you
So a
gotta
bad
laugh. I
rate
mean, what else
is
is there
no
these
joke
days?
at all. And Susan Eldridge tells us, no, she
Hi,
says hi
Susan.
first. And she says some great articles out on why we can afford to get through this crisis by Stephanie Kelton, Rohan Gray, and others. And Rohan Gray had a Twitter thread today in which he reported on his helping Rashida Tlaib with a proposal that she released today, which suggested that we mint 2 platinum coins of $1 trillion apiece.
I associate that to you.
Right, but Rohan went all the way back to the beginning to Carlos Mucha, of course, who was the first person to propose the use, okay, of platinum coins. But this came from an idea that was originally developed by okay, it'll come to me by the state bank advocate. And that name is very familiar to me, but I'm blanking out on it right now. Anyway, she suggested that the capability to mint a coin with an arbitrary face value that came about as a result of the Constitution. It's just an extension of the Constitution. So she had been arguing for a long time this was possible. And Carlos Mucha discovered in, I think, the middle of in June of 2010, he discovered the platinum coin law, which had been passed in 1995. And so he extrapolated from what he said, and he immediately saw that the platinum coin law could do what she wanted. And okay, so he made the proposal then in some comments. And then things developed very gradually from there. It was in comment streams for some time. And then he and I got to talking in December of, I think it was in December of 2010, actually. And I think he first began to talk about it in June of 2010. It wasn't in June of 2009, it was in June of 2010. And we started communicating vigorously about it. Okay. And I urged him to blog about it. So he did a blog for Fire Dog Lake very early in January of 2011. And I followed up with the companion blog a couple of days later. And Warren Mosler then picked up the whole thing for discussion on his website on January 20th. And there was a monumental thread on the platinum coin. And most of the issues raised by the platinum coin were actually originally discussed in that particular thread. Almost everybody who was anybody in MMT at that time, and a lot of people who later left MMT, were all exchanging on that particular thread. It was really a wonderful conversation. And that's what really lit the fire under the platinum coin. It was that conversation.
Wow.
Then it quieted down.
I only know about it. I don't know the specifics of what she wants to do, but I've just heard of the topic. Actually, you're teaching it to me now. What is that exactly like? What is the nature of that? So they would create a couple of $1 trillion coins, which I'm surprised it's only a couple of trillion. Like, why not just one for 20 trillion or whatever? And then what do they?
Coin law allowed for was for the Secretary of Treasury to mint 1 ounce coins that were made of platinum. And the Secretary of the Treasury was given the discretion. Well, actually, he was given the discretion to order the mint to mint such a coin. Okay. And to place an arbitrary face value on the coin. The coin could have any face value that he wanted it to have. In other words, he could place a dollar value on the coin, or a $5 value, or a $50,000 value, or a $1 trillion value. Okay. Or a $100 trillion value. Right. The person who actually proposed the $100 trillion coin first was Stephanie Kelton. I had contented myself with a proposal for a $60 trillion coin, but prior to that, but not having the same feel for memes, I suggested the $60 trillion coin because I figured, well, what I want is something that would produce enough money that we could pay back the national debt and freely spend for perhaps 15 years. And then the country would have enough experience with it, to decide if they wanted to continue the experiment of the platinum coin. So I calculated that 60 trillion was going to be enough for that. And that's why I selected that number. But Stephanie,
what is the specific plan that she's proposing now regarding minting a coin?
She hasn't said much about the $100 trillion coin since then, because she's very careful not to say things that will expose her to the charge that she's a banana republic person.
But I'm not talking about Stephanie Kelton. I'm talking about the current proposal, coronavirus proposal of this minting this coin. That's what I'm not familiar with. I haven't been following it aside from just knowing that basically the title of what's going on.
Okay, well, the $2 trillion coin is for paying for a $2 trillion program that was actually proposed by Rashida Tlaib and was introduced into the House. Okay, and it provides for substantial monthly payments to people, cash payments to people, okay, and immediate cash payments as well. I have the thread close by. If you hang on for a second, I can pick up. I should be able to get a hold of the thread that was on Twitter today by Rohan. Wait a minute. It turns out I've got it here. Okay, here's the thread. Okay, so Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib put forward a proposal for the minting of $2 trillion coins. And she said this includes the Treasury using its legal authority to create a new mint program to fund direct payments via preloaded $2,000 cash cards to everyone. Recharging the cash cards with $1,000 a month until a year after the economy recovers. And you can read it all at her site in the Congress at tlaib.house.gov. And then you probably can navigate your way to the URL, but from there. But anyway, this proposal provides $2,000 per person. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to understand I don't want to go too deep into this. I just want to understand the basics of how is minting a coin and then paying people, which has to be approved by the House, it seems. So yeah, I think you just said that, and Senate. How is that different than just proposing a decent law that does these things and provides the funding for it?
Well, it's different in a technical way. Okay, what happens is that, first of all, a coin can be minted under the authority of the president alone. So Trump can order the Secretary of the Treasury, can order the mint to mint about $2 trillion coins. Okay, the director of the mint can then take the $2 trillion coins up to the New York Fed and can deposit the $2 trillion coins in the public enterprise fund account of the Fed. Okay. Oh, now the Treasury Department has the legal right, it's specified in law, to sweep the public enterprise fund account of the mint for the seigniorage. The seigniorage is the profit between the face value of the coin and the cost of producing the coin and getting it up to the Federal Reserve Bank, okay, in New York. So the platinum coin would roughly cost maybe $3,500. So
Okay.
for each one of the coins, the Treasury would get a deposit in its account. Okay, in other words, its reserve account would be marked up by the Fed for $1 trillion minus $3,500 for each of the coins. So virtually $2 trillion, okay, in total would be added to the reserve account of the Treasury.
But you
Now,
said that the oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
that money could not be spent unless the Congress appropriated the money, but it would simply sit in the Treasury spending account. Okay, so it would just be there permanently. Okay, now the sometimes the objection has been raised to this, okay, by people saying, well, what happens if the chair of the Federal Reserve doesn't want to credit the Treasury spending account with the face value of the coin? Okay,
They
I
can't
mean,
do
what
that.
happens?
I'm pretty sure
Uh,
that that's not allowed. Pretty sure that that's what you're going to say. It's not allowed. They have to.
well, they have to, but it's more than that. Okay, in case the chairperson, okay, of the Fed, but differs on their interpretation of the law, and they decide they don't want to credit the coin because the chairperson of the Fed says, "Look, this was never intended, as part of the law for this to happen." Okay, so I'm not going to credit this coin. It's an illegitimate coin. It's not really worth $1 trillion. Okay, then the Secretary of the Treasury has the authority to say to the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, well, look, the law says, the Federal Reserve Act actually says that where you and I differ on financial interpretations of law, that the judgment of the Secretary of the Treasury uh, uh, is to hold. In other words, it's supposed to be the controlling judgment here and not the judgment, okay, of the
Okay.
chairperson of the Fed. Okay. And if the chairperson of the Fed still resists that interpretation, which is plain in the law, okay, then the president has cause to remove the chairperson of the Federal Reserve from his or her position as a chairperson. So the
Okay.
authority is there for the Secretary of the Treasury to enforce his interpretation of the law.
Got it. So what I think you're saying is that if we had a decent president and a well-appointed Treasury Secretary, this would be a reasonable method of going forward. But since Trump and Mnuchin are not going to be helping, they're not going to be helping us. If you know,
On on
if we're
on the contrary, Trump has been moving left on this. He wants to be a hero and give people, okay, a lot of money, especially since he screwed up on the spread of the coronavirus to start with. Okay, in other words,
well,
he's
yeah.
trying to tell everybody now that he acted in a very forceful and quick way on it. But we know very well that before he did anything, okay, he knew about what was going on. Uh, at least 1 month before he took any action at all. That, in other words, he was notified by the Chinese fairly quickly after the occurrence, okay, of the events. And he thought it was fake news. In fact, he said it was fake news. And he just didn't pursue anything at all. Okay. And as a result of that, okay, and as a result of the screw up at the CDC, which in part can be traced to budget cuts at the CDC, both through the Obama administration and also through the Trump administration, substantial budget cuts, like 40% of the CDC budget was cut.
Yeah, of course, of course.
This had an impact on their producing a test in timely fashion. When they did produce a test, it was no good. They made mistakes. Okay.
Well, yeah, actually, I know this part because the WHO offered a test to the CDC, and the CDC said no, we'll make our own. And then they tried to make
Right.
their own, and it
Well,
didn't work. And now
yeah,
we've only done a total of like 10,000 tests as of last week. Anyway, we've only done 10,000 tests in the entire country. When China is doing, I don't remember the exact number, something like 1.5 million every day. They're doing 1.5 million tests every day, and we've only done around 10,000 tests total in the entire country.
yes.
So, I mean, actually, this reminds me of the debate, the most recent debate, Bernie and Biden, and Bernie says, this is a crisis because the most disadvantaged don't have health care. Now they're losing their job insurance, and insurance is saying that we'll pay for the testing, but not for the treatment. Oh, great, thanks. And then Biden says, we can't worry about, health care for all and all these things because we have a crisis right now. And that crisis is coronavirus. And we need to get through this moment. And what he's saying, and this links to what Trump did with the CDC and funding and all this stuff, is that it's not a crisis right now. I mean, it is, but that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that this is a crisis for the privileged. This is a crisis for the rich. And now we care. And now we care. And now we need to do stuff to get through this crisis for the rich. And then we can go back to ignoring the crisis of the poor, which is ongoing and has been ongoing for 4 decades now. And the defunding of the CDC and the destroying of these departments by putting in people that will, that do the opposite of what these departments are intended for. It's all this, we can get away with stealing from people. I mean, to say it as simply as possible, because there's a crisis that affects them. They don't have the workers because they can be infected by their workers. They won't have production because their workers can't come in. They won't have sales because these disadvantaged people can't purchase their things. So this is a real. AOC said on the Intercepted podcast, which I came out yesterday. I'm not exactly sure, with her and Stephanie Kelton on the Intercepted podcast. AOC said something that this has been a slow motion crisis for 4 decades, and now it's just revealed for all to see, and all of those decisions are now affecting all of the privileged.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, since Monday, when Bernie Sanders advanced his emergency plan to handle the crisis, the only murmur from Joe Biden has been a tweet. And the tweet was about
I so badly want to talk with you.
Huh?
I so badly want to talk with you right now.
Okay, go
That's
ahead.
what his tweet was. No, that's what Joe Biden said. I so badly want to talk with you during this crisis.
Talk with Bernie Sanders?
No, Joe Biden is disappeared. But as I understand it, which maybe I was wrong, but what Joe said is, I really want to talk with you. I'm not. I've been away since last debate, while Bernie has done however many 5 town halls, whatever, on coronavirus. And Joe Biden is saying, I really want to talk with you. We're really trying to work on this technology to talk with you.
Oh, so in other words, he isn't able to talk with us because he doesn't have command of the technology. Is that
technology? It's really hard, Joe. It's really hard.
Yeah, I know it's really hard.
Just last night, Bernie had a town hall with 2 musical guests and with two guests, and it was flawless. It just went flawless. But Joe Biden can't he actually, I mean, whatever, I don't, this is not coronavirus. This is just making fun of Joe Biden. But
right, but what he tweeted out is he asked the CEOs of the country to agree not to buy back their stock for a whole year. And so far, that's the only policy response we've gotten from him to this crisis.
There you go. There you go.
There
And
we
it's asking
go.
nicely. It's
But,
asking nicely.
but he said,
And
I'm the
and they
guy
said
who should be president of the United States.
and there was a letter to Jeff Bezos, I think, and maybe some other big CEOs of you need to give your you really should be giving your workers whatever pay and a half for hazard, working in hazardous conditions, and you really should be blah 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 blah. And it's like, man, these federal representatives, if only they had a way to actually make this happen, as opposed to just ask nicely, if only they had like the power of law behind them or something.
Yes, and that brings us to a topic I think we want to discuss tonight,
Please.
which is, and we have plenty of time left, okay, because we don't, have the normal sort of limitation on this program. But we wanted to talk sometime about what would Roosevelt do, which is the title of a piece by Pavlina Chernyeva. She published in Project Syndicate on March 20th, 2020, just yesterday. Have you got it handy?
I'm pulling it up. I'm just pulling it up so I can have it at hand. Yes,
okay,
and
good.
she says, what struck me, the first thing that struck me in this article was we have to have a recession. We need to have a recession in order to get through this. We have to get people out of work.
Moreover,
We
a
are
recession is sadly necessary to stop the spread of this virus.
Yes, that's what she says.
Says.
Yep. Moreover, a recession is sadly necessary to stop the spread of this virus. In the United States, over 50% of jobs are at risk from layoffs, furloughs, reduced pay, and lost hours. Virtually every sector of the economy stands to lose a large chunk of its business. Household incomes will be devastated, and spending by consumers and firms will rapidly decline. The manufacturing collapse has already begun. The service economy, which employs 80% of all workers, will be next. And Stephanie Kelton on The Intercepted said that, I don't remember the exact timing of what she said, but before the crisis, there were 281,000 applications for unemployment. And in a week or so, there's going to be 2.25 million.
Yes,
which is,
I saw that too.
And 37 million people are vulnerable to potentially claiming unemployment in the near future, which I'm pretty sure is Great Depression levels.
Yes, in fact, it's much larger than the number that were unemployed at that time, because the population of the country was a lot smaller at that time. So we're talking about unemployment rates, 20%, and higher, and also U3 unemployment rates. In other words, headline unemployment rates of 20%, or higher.
Meaning that's the rosy version is 20%.
Yeah, that's the rosy
version. That's what I think you're saying.
It's not, in other words, it doesn't include the part-time employed who would like to work as full-time employees if they could. Right.
And the unhappily employed and
right.
Okay.
Okay, I think the supposed number of unemployed, right now in the rosy version, is something like 5 or 6 million people. So she's saying that's going to rise from 5 or 6 million people to 37 million people. That's what she's saying.
Right. And letting your viewers know the link to this article is the very first one in your description.
Right. It is the very first one because she said so many wide things. Pavlina, we mean. And she said that the pandemic, which is, she said one pandemic thus will lead to another, of unemployment. The pandemic, of unemployment. And in other things she's written, and in presentations, she's given, she's often compared the spread of unemployment in a recession
Right.
or a depression to an epidemic. It's
Yep.
one of her favorite ways of modeling the spread, okay, of unemployment.
That her paper about how unemployment is like a disease
Yes,
is one of my favorite academic papers that I've ever read, which is that it really is. It's like it is an infectious disease that it spreads uncontrolled, because we have uncontrolled in this society. There's no job guarantee and so on. So it spreads uncontrolled, and people scar. The longer that they are, it's like you're scarred because it makes you less and less hireable. Yeah,
yes, and she
that's a
said
wonderful paper.
the avalanche the avalanche the layoff avalanche will bring a wave of defaults, bankruptcies, and depressed profits. The domino effect will continue across many domains, from collapsing state and city tax revenues and business failures to impoverished communities, declining health outcomes, homelessness, and, quote, deaths of despair, unquote. And she's right. A lot of suicides are going to come about from this. Okay, there could eventually be enough deaths from suicide that they would approach the deaths from the coronavirus itself. That could easily happen.
There's actually a comment on this article who says, this is that uh, Pavlina's proposal in this article is Fantasyland, because we can't get any of this stuff through our Congress, and the Democrats won't do anything, let alone this much, and you know, and they're right. We can't get anything through a corrupt Congress, but that doesn't change the fact that, number one, it's possible, and number two, like I like what Bernie is doing, and not just right now, but what he's been doing since 2016, which is teaching people the truth. And MMT is just an element of that, the truth about economics. Bernie is a broader truth about politics, because like his coronavirus proposal right now, like that he had last night, and the link may be in your description to Bernie's proposal. I'm not sure of how he would deal with coronavirus. Yes, it is. The third link in your thing is Bernie's suggested response to it, which
Yes.
I think incorporates, not specifically, but definitely incorporates the spirit of Randy Ray's single pager. His economic response, like Bernie's a more broad response, not just economics. What I like about all of these things is that even though it's unlikely that our corrupt Congress is going to do any of these things, it teaches us what's possible and what should be done, that it's possible to be done, and that it's the right thing to do, and that now we have a baseline to compare what actually happens, so that we can be educated on, this is wrong and this is the reason that this is wrong. MMT and Bernie Sanders really give us uh, a baseline of truth, so that when it doesn't happen, that we can say clearly of, this is wrong and this is why it's wrong.
Yes, I entirely agree with that. I also don't. I'm not going to assume. I don't assume that this Congress will not do at least a part, okay, of what is being suggested by Bernie Sanders and by Pavlina, okay, and by other people who think, okay, as they do, because what these things are telling us is what is possible and what we can have. And it gives us a basis for action. It gives us a basis for calling our senators, for calling our representatives in the House, and for telling them, we know you can do these things. We know the government can afford these things. We know the truth about federal financing. The truth is out now. And you need to either learn it or but you don't know it. And when you do learn it, you have to act upon it right now because these proposals are possible. And if you don't act on it, we will know that you're not acting in our interest, but only in the interest of your donors. And if you keep on acting in that way, when the next election comes around, whatever it takes, you're going to be out because we're going to know that you screwed us, true and blue. And we're going to be very, very unhappy about that.
Well,
And we're
I
not going to take it lying down this time because we don't have any doubts about it. We know it can be done and we know what you have to do. And you better do it if you value your job.
I agree with everything you just said. I think two things. Number one, I think we're getting to the point where electoral politics is not even enough. That we need to, electoral politics is clearly not working to a very significant degree for our needs. But yes, waiting for the election, I don't think is necessarily. We potentially should be doing something before the election, like immediately, like as soon as this is over.
Oh yeah,
But
well, I think
like
that
basically,
is part of Bernie's purpose. What he wants to do, and what we should be doing, is mobilizing the population now for a
and
movement.
it is being mobilized, but it's being crushed by electoral politics. That's the whole point of this election, in my view, is that it is being mobilized, but electoral politics and these official rules are set up to guarantee failure. But what the other thing I wanted to say, however, was I think that to an extent that some of these things will be happening, not because they fear their job. They fear the coronavirus. They fear contracting the coronavirus
I
because
agree.
they can catch this virus from poor people. And they need these poor people, these disadvantaged people, to make their stuff and to buy their stuff. Not to mention, that Trump wants to get elected. So he is definitely using this as much as he can to come across as, we created all this horror that led up to this crisis, but I am now doing, at least substantially, significantly, some serious steps to alleviate these symptoms. So I think all of these things combined, to an extent, they can't let us suffer, because if the disadvantaged suffer, then that really directly endangers the rich.
Yeah, well,
Again, like I
it's
said before,
also,
that this is not just a crisis now, this is a crisis for everyone, which includes the privileged.
yes, absolutely. But this also creates a competition on the dynamic because we see Trump is moving to the left. Also, Romney is moving to the left. Tom Cotton, okay, is moving to the left. The Wall Street people are moving to the left, further left than Nancy Pelosi, further left, okay, than the leadership, okay, the Democratic Party in Congress, further left than Joe Biden, the person they want to put in, okay, as a nominee. So the point is, if they keep doing what they're doing now, they're throwing the election to Trump. They know they're throwing the election to Trump. So I don't think they can keep on doing it. I think Pelosi has to respond because she's going to have her whole caucus on it. And this coming week, her whole caucus is going to be on top of her. And they're going to be saying, look, these idiots even want to put cash in people's hands quickly. And you don't. You're insisting on a means test. And they're going to tell her just what AOC said, okay, in the Intercept article, specifically. Look, we can tax them later. We don't have to do any means testing now. We can take it all back, 100% of it, if we need to take it all back. The point is, we need to get this money out there, and we need to get it out now, and we need to get out the $2 trillion. We need to get it out to business, and we need to get it out to people. And the people have to get as much or more than the businesses are getting, because the people have to buy what the businesses have to sell. And
Right.
so,
And
I mean, that's the way the economy has to run.
AOC summarized this very well on the Intercepted podcast, where the two critical steps, immediate critical steps, are debt relief and getting money into people's hands. So stop rent payments, stop, all these, electricity payments, all these utility payments, stop debt from accumulating, forgive all debt, or not necessarily forgive, but at least stop all payments of debt and get money into people's hands. Those are the first two steps.
Yes. And she was right on the money there. She was right on the money. In fact, most of this article is on the money.
The Pavilion article?
No, actually, The Intercept, the podcast, okay, on The Intercept,
Right.
there's a transcript, okay, of the
Oh,
podcast,
okay.
okay, that's on the
Okay.
internet now, okay, in the form of an article. And so you have the quotations from AOC and from Mehdi Hassan and from Steph.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there. So, okay, it's very, very handy. Okay, and Steph too is talking about cash assistance to people and the importance of cash payments, okay, and cash assistance, either supplied by check or by electronic means to people.
Or the people in the comments are actually saying, for those who don't have bank accounts, ATM cards from the post office.
Yep.
There's creative ways of doing this.
Yes, there are creative ways to doing it. And they're beginning to think about the creative ways because they're now getting into a position, okay, a lot of the people in Congress, okay, are getting into a position where they want to supply the cash. And they don't want to hear any objections from people say, oh, it's not possible because this is in the way or that is in the way or the other thing is in the way. So they're trying to find workarounds right now so people can get substantial cash. And not just $1,000 payment up front, but maybe $1,000 or $2,000 up front. And then every month, okay, another
Every month.
$2,000. Some people are talking not
Per
only for the
person,
adults,
not family. Yeah,
but
$2,000 every
some
man, woman,
people
and
are
child.
talking not only for the adults, but for the children too.
Right.
Some people are talking the same amount for the children. That is the same amount
Right.
of money for every individual in the United States, whether they're adults or whether there's children.
Right.
So,
And it's and I mean it's in capital's interest, in the privileged interest for this, because much of it is going to go to them. Much of it is going to go to them. Rent payments, purchasing all these products and whatever. That a lot of that just goes right up to them. So they should be happy about this.
they should be.
It's not like we're gonna. It's not like the disadvantaged. Like, I'm gonna be investing that $2,000 per person and accumulating wealth during this crisis. I'm gonna be paying my bills.
Absolutely. I'm going to be paying my bills because hopefully these things are going to start passing and people are going to have the money to pay their bills. And if they have their money to pay their bills, then the economy is going to survive. And that's the best way to have the banks survive too, because among their bills is what they owe to the banks, what they owe on their credit cards, what they owe in interest. Those things keep the banks going as well. So you've got to have
Right.
that.
Right. Steve Gonzo just said in the comments, lower the eligibility age of Medicare to 0. And what I've heard with that is Medicare could be retrofitted easily to handle all coronavirus testing and treatment for
Right.
everyone going
And
forward, at the
yes.
very
And
least.
also, Bernie has proposed that in his plan. That's
Right.
a part of his plan.
That's
Okay.
right. That's where I
Except
got it from.
during the period of the coronavirus, it would not only include treatment for the coronavirus, it would include treatment for everything else.
Some
As
temporary
well.
Medicare for all. Temporary Medicare for all.
Temporary Medicare for all.
I mean,
So
it's
people could try it
absolutely
out.
critical.
Yeah, so
It's
people could
absolutely
try it
critical.
out
I
and
mean,
see how well,
and
okay, it works.
right, and I mean, it, if we let this get out of control, I read a very scary study. I don't know if you have in the description, like Liberty. I forget what it is. A London study that I just really terrifying. That if we do nothing, we're talking 90 million deaths potentially around the world. Talking 4 million deaths in the United States in a few months. And a significant reason for that is because of the healthcare system does not have enough equipment, ventilators in particular, and that so all these coronavirus victims will need a ventilator because it so affects your lungs, and which will affect existing patients who need ventilators, and that's how this gets out of control. Which is like the what's it called, the lower the curve, I forget the
The
term,
curve, it's
like
called flatten the curve.
flatten the curve. And if you look at that diagram, which I don't know why, but it struck me like the curve is like up here, and the capacity of our healthcare system is here. And the
Right.
whole
So
point of
you
this,
have to
the
flatten the
whole point of
curve
this is to get the number of cases below the capacity of our healthcare system. That is when all hell breaks loose, is
to
if we
get,
get above that capacity.
yes, to get the number of cases that have to be treated to fit the capacity of the healthcare system. Okay, it's not a question even so much of containing, okay, the number of cases. Okay, it's a case of essentially delaying the number of cases so not everyone gets the disease at once.
Right,
It's still
right,
estimated that a very large percentage of people is going to come down with the disease sooner, okay, or later. But if you
right.
can
But you got to
flatten out the
distribute it over
curve,
time.
if you can flatten out the curve, okay, with respect to the cases that have to go to the hospital and that actually strain the resources of the healthcare system, then you can get through this crisis without actually breaking your healthcare system, and not so many people are going to have to die. And we already see this in certain countries. We see that with very strong action, the South Koreans have been able to lower the case fatality rates to something like zero point 0.6, but 0.6% at this point.
Right.
Okay, the
I just
Chinese.
I just I just spoke with my I just did an interview with my own primary care physician, who's been practicing for 30 years, and it's hopefully going to be released any day now. But what he said, what is scary, what I find scary, and which is another reason of this flattening the curve, that this capacity has to go down, because what he was telling me is he's above 60, and he says that it is very likely, if not inevitable, that he is going to be catching it along with all of his staff.
Yeah,
Which means that our capacity, this capacity, is not a rigid line, because all of these potential doctors and nurses are going to become patients. So not only will the number of patients increase, the number of healthcare workers at the same exact time will decrease, which is like a doubling effect, and that's scary. I
right.
mean, the
And
fact that
what's
he
even more scary is since they're not testing now, that many of the healthcare workers, okay, who are working now with people may have the disease and may be currently spreading it to patients because
You
they
can have
feel
you
that,
can be infected for it for up to 14 days before showing any symptoms.
yes, right, absolutely. And so that's the situation we have now. The lack of testing has been criminal because, well, we just don't know who has it and who doesn't have it.
We're
And when
working
we
in the
don't
dark, which is
know
why we
that,
have to shut down the entire country, because we don't know what we're dealing with, because we don't have tests to determine.
yes, it was so. Their policies, by right across the board, have been so stupid until very recently, until they finally
But
realized that they have to flatten the curve.
and Trump is doing in some steps that he's doing or at least proposing is like that whatever law that the constitutional something of Defense Act where you tell companies that they have to produce like
Yeah, the
ventilators or
Defense
whatever.
Production Act.
Right. So and Bernie said it like the night before he announced it. So who knows if he got it from Bernie or not? But like he's doing some stuff good because he has to. I mean, what choice is there? But it's like this whole thing is like, and this is just an example of, I guess, neoliberalism as a whole, which is it's the fake superhero where they spend 4 decades creating problem after problem after problem, but then they come in and they rescue us from the problems that they created so they could be the superhero.
Yeah.
It's the criminal. It's the criminal who creates the problem, but so that they can come in later and swoop in and rescue us as if pretending that they're the superhero.
Yes, I know. And, in 1 week, the approval rating of Donald Trump in the same survey spiked from 43% to 55%, and his disapproval rating shrank from 55% to 43% in 1 week. Because in 1 week, okay, over the last week, it's begun to seem like he's doing some of the things that he's supposed to do. And also, it's begun to seem like some of the Republicans are starting to try to act in the interest of the population at large and not simply their donors. And so Trump
Well,
is
again,
beginning to get credit for this.
they are acting in the interest of their donors because their donors need the workers and need to not. That's the thing. But I think you're right. But it really is. It is selfish. But you are correct, and it's because of the vacuum of that. Democrats who pretend to care about the people, but simultaneously sabotage themselves with how we're going to pay for it. They want to help us and they don't help us, but they feel terribly guilty about it, and they're allowing the Republicans to come in and to actually do substantial stuff, which is not great, but it's better than nothing.
Okay, Trump's been saying that he's going to protect Social Security, while of course he's been making plans to cut Social Security. The second year in other words, after he gets elected, he's making plans to cut it in his second year, okay, of the second term. I
That's
don't
great.
think that's a surprise.
No, I
That's
mean, of
great. Yeah.
course, of course. I mean, of course, he's going to veto Medicare for all. We could in one moment he'll say, but I want to get back to. I don't want to just bust on Biden here, but in one moment he'll say, "We are the United States of America. We can do anything we set our minds to." And then he'll turn right around and say, "But how are you going to pay for it from Medicare for all? We can save the entire planet with Green New Deal. Medicare, how are you going to pay for it?" But not only, even if they do pass it, he'll veto it anyway. So it just, I don't
Yeah. So
forget
you're
Joe
talking
Biden.
Joe Biden census now, right?
Of course, I mean, of course.
Right. Okay. But Joe Biden, when it comes to the Green New Deal, even though he says we can have the Green New Deal, when it comes to the Green New Deal, and somebody wants to spend enough to actually do the Green New Deal, he then also says of that, we cannot pay for it.
Of course.
Of course. So that's what is going on there. But okay, I do think there's a little bit of hope here because uh, if things keep going on in this way with Joe Biden and his actions in the campaign, then what people are likely to see is more and more of a gap and more of a vacuum between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in terms of the extent of their activity and their effort to do something about this crisis. So one is coming over as constantly presidential, okay, and the other one is coming over as absent.
But no, I mean, yes, you're correct. In a just world, you're correct, of course. But this is not a just world, and nobody is seeing
Oh,
Bernie.
I'm not saying it's a just world. Okay, I'm saying from the perceptual standpoint of people who are out there, okay, and who are watching this, are seeing Bernie Sanders expressing leadership on the issues multiple times per week on the coronavirus crisis and things related to the coronavirus. And they're seeing Trump do multiple things per week as well, because Trump is having these briefings all the time, okay, about the coronavirus. And yeah, he lies and there's a lot of fiction, okay, and everything else, but he's there. He's trying to lead on it. Bernie Sanders is trying to lead on it.
But he's.
And the most
I
striking
agree with
thing
you, but
about the last 4 or 5 days is, where is Joe?
I agree with you that Bernie has been doing just that. He's been doing just that for his entire career, and it's not making a difference under these official rules. It's not making a difference under this electoral politics. 100,000 people saw like or whatever it was, like a million people, 100,000 people, a lot of people saw Bernie Sanders last night do his coronavirus town hall. But as far as electoral politics is concerned, these official rules, I don't think it makes much of a difference. I honestly don't think it makes much of a difference within this this corrupt official rules electoral politics framework, which is
Well,
why
okay, we will see.
I,
Okay,
you
if
know,
things continue like
we
this
need
and Joe
to,
Biden continues to
you
be
know,
active, if he continues to be absent, he continues to be incapable of campaigning, even on a digital platform. And what he's
right.
showing now is his digital incapacity. Okay, not just his incapacity to physically campaign, but his incapacity to campaign through the internet. He doesn't even
Of
have
course.
that.
And
And the more people see
that's the
that,
only way.
yeah, but, the more people see that, the more the polls will begin to shift again into Bernie's favor.
I
And
hope you're right.
and
I hope you're right.
keep in mind, 7 primaries have now been postponed until June, including 2 in the Axela group that were due to occur, okay, on April 28th. Now, with the crisis continuing to worsen this month, I think the chances are good that every one of the Axela primaries is going to be postponed until June, at least until June
Well,
2nd, and
that's a good theory, and that is,
later in June. And
and
that
that's
gives
why.
plenty of time for the polls to shift again.
Okay, well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Of course, I hope you're right. That would be amazing, and that is why they rammed these last three primaries through. They
That is why.
rammed these. They rammed these
That
last three
is
primaries through to push. What's it called? What's that movie where they carry the dead guy around? Bernie, Weekend at Bernie's. So they carry Joe Biden over this supposed threshold of he is the presumptive nominee. So they had all these tens of thousands, millions of people go out and vote and expose themselves to coronavirus. And on that, so that was the day that he, supposedly won. That nothing went wrong, everything went perfectly. Every precinct had exactly what they need, and they closed down a third of the stations, and some polling locations had
there was
absolutely
one thing
had
that went wrong for them.
no.
And the one
Well,
thing that went wrong was that the Ohio primary was postponed.
Okay, so that's good, but I'm just saying it was so illegitimate. Like
It was.
even setting aside the murder of the people that went out to vote. Let's just set the murder of people exposing millions to coronavirus aside. There was
How
still
can you set
there.
aside the murders?
Let's just set that aside, because even if it were legitimate, even if people weren't being exposed, that there were districts. I mean, I actually have an account on Twitter, P Bernard Sanders, President Bernard Sanders, P Bernard Sanders on Twitter, where I am documenting all of the stuff that happens in each state. So when someone comes and says to us, I'm going all over the place. I gotta remember what I wanted to say here. Florida shut down. Yeah. P. Bernard Sanders on Twitter. I am documenting everything that happens in every single state against Bernie and for the other guy. And of course, all the mistakes, all of all of the whatever, all the bad stuff that happens just so happens to be against Bernie, and just so happens to be, exit polling way out of the margin of error. And
Yes,
a
I
polling
noticed
station
that too.
a polling station in Illinois or whatever state just voted on Tuesday. One polling station had no ballots at all, none, and they had to turn all these people away. They closed down a third of the station so they could control the situation and compact all of these people into even fewer stations, to standing in line even in close proximity for hours, even more people, to
Oh
use a
yes,
touch
and
screen
they did
in the
this,
middle of the pandemic.
and they did this to stations that they thought were going to go for Bernie because they had a pretty good idea of where Bernie was strong.
Okay, so I didn't even know that part of it. And on this, so all, it's illegitimate even beyond the corona, exposing people to a disease. But and actually, what's most upsetting to me is that even Bernie acts as if these are totally legitimate contests, totally fair process. That's what's most upsetting to me. But on the same
Uh,
day that
yeah,
Florida
just to
voted.
add to that, that's very upsetting to me too. I think that Bernie
Good.
has enough money. He gathered enough money, but from us, and he has the capability to get a lot more money from us to pursue legally every one of these contests.
But for forgetting pursue, I mean, I agree, pursue legally, but there's a step before pursuing legally, and that is to educate the people on exactly what these injustices are. I mean, he's got Warren Gunnels. Warren Gunnels is the king of receipts. He could put receipt after receipt after receipt of this exit poll. Why is this happening? I want an
I completely
investigation.
agree.
What
Warren
is this
Reynolds can do this.
happening with, the media has slow walked all of my the media has slow walked my and has supercharged all of my positive results, and has supercharged all the positive results of my opponent. And this is exactly how and why. And here's evidence, here's video evidence, and so on. It's educating the people on how unjust a process this is, and he has not done that. And in my opinion, that's probably his biggest flaw. That's probably his biggest, I think, his most just egregious mistake, to treat this process as if it is fair. But what I wanted to say before
Yes,
was
I
that,
think that's true too. And I also think it's true of many of the commentators. Like, I really like in general the commentary of the Crystal Ball, okay, and Sagar and Jetty, okay, on the Rising program.
the
Okay,
Hill, yeah,
I really
yeah,
like
she's good.
that. But they and a number of other commentators as
Even
well.
TYT.
Yes, even TYT, they constantly say, well, Bernie lost this state by so much, or that state, okay, by so much. And they treat these
Yep.
losses as serious. In other words, they raise the issues. Like, for example, why did so few young people come out this time compared to 2016? Okay, in other words, why did that happen? Well, maybe it happened because of voter suppression, because of rules that were passed in each of the
College
states,
campuses,
which
yeah.
were designed to disenfranchise them. What was the
Yep.
impact of that? I mean, it may be that Bernie was just as popular or more popular among young people than he was in 2016, but that they literally could not get to the polls even if they tried. So that might have been a very serious aspect of this, but we don't hear
Right.
this from. Okay, instead, what they do is take as a legitimate thing the question, why didn't he do as well among them in 2020? As if it's a failure of Bernie. It might be a failure of Bernie, but it might not have anything to do with Bernie and his campaigning and the impact of his campaign.
Right.
It might just be due to voter
Until
suppression.
okay, we are two more things, and we're pretty far off coronavirus right now, but I just want to say two more things, which is number one, until it is paper ballots counted in public, we have a right to say that something's wrong and there's something not
I know,
legitimate
I
about
know,
this.
and
If
especially
Bernie
when
won,
they
if Bernie lost fair and square, I have no problem with that. But we have no idea if he lost fair and square. We have
when there
no
are gaps
idea.
between the exit polls and the actual result that are in excess of 4%,
Excess of, yeah, double the margin of error in many
we
states.
have a right to assume that this didn't happen by chance.
Right, because it's
Now, the
all
only
against
thing I
Bernie.
can think of as an explanation for that is that it happened through rigging. And if it didn't happen through rigging, then why is it that all the gaps in all the states are always in favor of Joe Biden and always against Bernie Sanders?
Okay, two more things. I saw a screenshot, and who's to say that this particular example is accurate? We'll never know. But it's just, again, it's all of these things are, against Bernie and for the other guy. I saw a screenshot of someone looking at results for Michigan, or yeah, Michigan, 1025, whatever it was, showed the votes for each candidate and the percentage for each candidate as the results were coming in. 2 minutes later, 1027, the all of the candidates had their votes going slightly up. Bernie's votes went down by 300,000 in 2 minutes. And the last thing I wanted to say, which was regarding the election, is this very same day that Florida voted and exposed all of these voters to potentially spreading the virus, was the very same day that Florida announced that their schools were going to be closed for at least a month and up to the entire school year.
Yes. Crazy. Right? Absolutely crazy. So Florida's closing its schools, and Florida's forcing its old people to come to the polls if they want to vote for their favorite candidate
On the same day
on the
that
same
they
day.
announced it.
On the same day.
Yes. And you would think that forcing people to go to the polls in a disease that mostly affects people over 60, and that's the constituency that most supports the establishment candidate, that I just find that just like a sort of an extra interesting thing, an aspect of this story. But yeah, so all right, so I didn't expect this to be Bernie campaign, Joe. Um, uh, what do you want? Let's get back to coronavirus. I'm not exactly sure what else there is to say, but
Okay,
you
I
know,
think what we could do is go a little more into the detail of what was said by Pavlina in What Would Roosevelt Do? I think
okay.
we can go back to that.
Yes, let me open that back up again. Maybe I could read a little bit. This is not really that long of an article.
No, it's not. So go ahead and read it.
And you'll stop. Yeah, I'll read it, and you'll just stop me, and we can just give commentary on all the way down.
Okay.
So I'm going to start at the beginning. So this was March 20th. So what's today? 21st. So this was yesterday. Project Syndicate. It's the first link in the description for people watching the live stream. It's the first link in the description. And actually, before I start, there is a comment. There's some interesting comments, and the one that says Pavlina is in fantasy land, I actually responded to, but I don't think it's been, they haven't approved it yet. But I actually responded to that. What would Roosevelt do? Pavlina Cherneva. The U.S. government should pull out all the stops in mitigating the economic fallout from COVID-19, not just by dispersing cash to all households, but also by implementing a federal job guarantee and many other long overdue policies. After all, for a self-financing government, money is no object. So a federal job guarantee would be a completely different fashion than it would be in normal times. Like we need these companies that cannot produce what they normally produce to be able to put out ventilators and to do these things. And for people at home, I bet that we could find interesting jobs to connect them with, for example, like seniors that don't have family or something. And I can picture reading stories to kids and assisting teachers and stuff. Like we
Yes,
can be
and there are
creative.
also some very essential things to have people do. Specifically, there are going to be a lot of people who will be getting the coronavirus and staying home because
Right.
it won't be very serious, okay, at first. But there is a need to track each and every one of those people to see how they are doing and how they are responding, okay, and to make sure that they are not alone while they're going through their illness. Okay. And the
Right.
reason why it's so important to track them is it's important to track their symptoms and how these symptoms are moving through the populations around them. We need data and
Right.
people
And,
tracking them and calling them. We have to look at the data collection aspects, okay, of that.
and in addition to data, that is actually an aspect that I hadn't considered. That's actually, obviously very important. But you and I are conducting a show. Last night Bernie Sanders conducted a show, a full produced show with two musical guests and all these, you know, the internet has, to a substantial degree, is keeping our sanity.
I
It's
know.
keeping us connected.
I know.
So, it's amazing. It's amazing. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I think Google Classroom, the Chromebooks that these kids have in school, I don't like it. I think it takes away from human interaction. And, it allows kids to watch YouTube videos in between activities and stuff, depending on the filtering of the school, which I don't like. I just don't like that. I don't like the taking away of human interaction. But during this crisis, what a miracle. Google Classroom and all of these tools. My wife, who is an elementary school teacher, is still employed, stuck at home, teaching all of her kids every day, talking with her kids, having grade level meetings because of all of these internet technologies. We have never experienced this before, and
Yes, and there's one point about that that's important but to emphasize. If you know the person you're interacting with, even though it's over the internet, it still is human contact with
it's as good.
someone you already know.
It is as it during school, I think it takes away from human interaction. But during this crisis where we have to be separated, it could not be better. It could not be better.
Yes.
It is as close
Yes.
to in human contact as possible. Okay, so I'll keep going. So New York. This is paragraph number 2, the first main paragraph. New York. The fallout from the coronavirus pandemic will be nothing like that of the 2008 financial crisis, nor will a V-shaped recovery be achieved through conventional stimulus, not even through truly massive conventional stimulus. We are at war with COVID-19, and in wartime, civilian production grinds to a halt, and the only work that is needed is for the war effort itself, ventilators and so on. Moreover, a recession is sadly necessary. That's just mind-boggling to me. Is sadly necessary to stop the spread of this virus. In the United States, over 50% of jobs are at risk from layoffs, furloughs, reduced pay, and lost hours. Virtually every sector of the economy stands to lose a large chunk of its business. Household incomes will be devastated, and spending by consumers and firms will rapidly decline. The manufacturing collapse has already begun. The service economy, which employs 80% of all workers, will be next. You want to comment on that before I keep going?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, just a moment. I'm just going to grab a drink. Okay. One pandemic thus will lead to another of unemployment. The avalanche of layoffs will bring a wave of defaults, bankruptcies, and depressed profits. The domino effect will continue across many domains, from collapsing state and municipal tax revenues and business failures to impoverished communities, declining health outcomes, homelessness, and deaths of despair. And it's just like the federal government could easily stop this from happening, and they're just not. How should governments actually? I'm sorry. Excuse me, just for like 10 seconds. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, Jeff will be back in a moment. I read the virus stays with you for 37 days after you recover, and it can reinfect the patient.
I didn't exaggerate.
Okay,
right.
no, you didn't exaggerate.
Okay.
Okay, continue.
Okay, continue. How should governments respond? The same way that the U.S. government did under President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the World War II era. The first priority is to mobilize. That means building temporary field hospitals, drive-through clinics, and emergency health centers. It means cranking up production of essential equipment and medication, staffing health facilities adequately, and establishing support services for the hungry, homeless, and most vulnerable. And it means deploying an army to disinfect airports, schools, and critical public places. That I find, that surprised me. That's like, it's obvious, and I just had never thought of it before. To actually, like, that's the equivalent. I see that as the equivalent of cleaning parks. Like during this time, that's sort of the equivalent of cleaning parks and public places and so on. It's disinfecting.
Yes, but also it provides one very important activity that might find a place under the job guarantee program. These are very important things for people to do.
And that keep them safe and keep everybody else safe. Keep the people
Right,
who are doing it safe,
right.
and
slow down the progress of the coronavirus, flatten that curve.
right, and give people things to do during this time where they have to, right. Okay.
Right, and the cost of the federal job guarantee, that can easily be handled from an MMT point of view. I mean, it's just an afterthought. All we have to do is structure the funding process in the right way.
Right, and all of these layoffs, these, potentially unemployment to the level of the Great Depression, means that we have all of those workers ready and waiting to do something. So obviously we can do it. How are we going to pay for it? We'll pay for it with those people, right?
Absolutely, with them doing work that we absolutely must have to save lives and to save the very structure of our society. So they'll be doing essential work, and there won't be any inflation. They won't be sitting at home and doing nothing that's productive for the economy. And that's a very important thing to emphasize.
Right. Okay. And it means deploying an army to disinfect airports, schools, and critical public places. Second, we need to make it easier for people to stay home, such as by implementing short-term debt deferments, including on small business and mortgage loans, and suspending utility bills, as some European countries are already doing. Governments also should be providing income support in the form of extended unemployment insurance, food stamps, and housing benefits. In the US, all work requirements for public benefits should be abolished. Duh. I added that. Pavlidin didn't write that. And the federal government should extend immediate financial assistance to state governments constrained by balanced budget laws.
To add a comment here, that is very, very important here because since people will be losing their jobs, okay, and will be getting, into layoffs, there has to be a situation where the state governments can fund themselves in part through taxation, but clearly the tax revenues are not going to be as great, okay, as they are in a normal full employment economy. So at the state level, there's going to be funding gaps, and we can't afford the states in this period when it's so important to take care of the health of people to be short, okay, of funds. So the federal government has to do what's known, okay, as revenue sharing with the states, and there's very little of that, okay, that's going on now, and that has been going on for a long time. This is something we're going to have to reinstitute so the state governments can do what it is their function to do in providing for the welfare of their states.
Can you elaborate on what revenue sharing is? Like
Oh yeah,
how that
oh yeah,
works?
oh yeah. There used to be revenue sharing programs that were very important in the 1970s, okay, and 1980s.
Well, hold on. Before you proceed, I want to put more context in this question, which is revenue sharing with a currency issuer who doesn't need revenue. I'm not exactly clear on like how that works, what that means.
Okay, it's called revenue sharing, but what it is the currency issuer actually funding the individual states. Okay, in other words, defining a pot, okay, of reserves, if you will, that will be transferred to the state governments based
Okay.
on certain formulas that are established by the federal government. It should be done based on need. During the 1970s, there were actually need indexes that were developed under federal contracts, okay, in grants, in order to inform the revenue sharing programs of the Carter administration. So there's a history of work, okay, in this area, so that a pot of funds, okay, that are allocated to the states for purposes like this would be distributed fairly to the states. And there were even funding formulas that were developed for the states to use so they could fairly distribute the funds to counties, okay, and to people.
It seems like per capita is the way to go.
Well, it's not simply per capita, but it also has to do with things like the level of economic development, okay, of counties, because there are some counties and
Okay.
areas, okay, within states and some cities that are very much, okay, in need based on poverty statistics, housing statistics.
Per capita is one element, one
Per
piece
cap-
of the function, one
yeah,
element
per
of that formula.
capita is one piece of the function, but uh, okay, there's a need to use measures that actually measure need per capita and allocate funds to the states, okay, on that basis. Certain states are going to be a lot poorer, okay, than others, and they will have higher needs per capita. And there were during the 1970s funding formulas for doing this. They were not the best, okay, of funding formulas, but still they were better than simply allocating it, okay, on just the per capita basis.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
They were
So
fairer than that.
it's basically just a stupid way of saying giving states money. They're just calling it revenue sharing to give the impression of like that taxes are partially
Well,
doled out,
in the
whatever.
1970s, okay, they believed that what you distributed to them was tax revenue.
Right, of course. Sure, sure, sure. I want to make a comment on means testing before I go back to this article. Uh, I've been thinking a lot about means testing, and as with particularly with the presidential campaign. So means testing is everybody must fill out a form to convince some faraway bureaucrat, anonymous bureaucrat, that you are poor enough to get some benefit. And a lot of like Pete Buttigieg, I've seen Pete Buttigieg say this, where he'll say that we don't want to give benefits to the rich because they don't need it. So it's like it's petty revenge on the rich. But that is the shield from that they hide behind to basically screw all the disadvantaged, to put them in means testing, which means they have to fill out that form to prove that they're poor. And also, I see, like Pete Buttigieg, for example, the only time you hear people saying this is to a crowd of privileged people. I don't see anybody saying that kind of language. We don't want the rich to get these free college because that's unfair because they can afford it. So we don't want the rich getting it. I never hear anyone say that the rich don't deserve this, so we don't want them to get it. I never hear anyone saying that to a crowd of people who are desperate for free college and free health care. I only see that statement, that sentiment being said to a crowd of people who I'm pretty sure have pretty good health care and pretty good, that are pretty secure in education and so
All
on.
right. Okay. So the way I feel about it is this. Okay. The idea, okay, of only aiding people who need it, okay, is not a ridiculous idea. However, doing means testing by having people go through a bureaucratic process is totally unnecessary. I mean, just specify levels of income, okay, and or wealth or some combination of the two that you don't want to give money to, and tax the money back from those after the fact. I mean, what's the
after
problem?
the fact,
Distribute
right?
what
So
you're going to.
universal, just like they're talking about right now. What someone said, that just, I think it was AOC, that just give them the money. We can deal with the unfairness of it after the fact.
Yeah,
People
we
need the
can
money
deal
right.
with taxation later. In other words,
So
we
you
can
can do
level the playing field with taxation, and that's a
you
lot
can do
cleaner way to do it. And the
right.
IRS is set up to do that anyway.
And you can do universal on the front end to
Yeah,
not subject anyone to the humiliation of means testing to prove that they are poor. Actually, this really strikes me, that you have to fill out a FAFSA for college to get a loan for college, which is proving that you're poor enough to get a loan for college. And what is a student loan except, and this is not from me, I heard this from someone, and it just strikes me how amazing it is. Student loans are future punishment for daring to aspire above your station.
yes,
That's what it
I've heard
is.
that said also.
That's just, that's what it is. And to think of the depth of how far that evil goes, because 97% of loans, 93% of loans, student loans, are held by the education department, the Department of Education. They charge you interest. You pay them your principal and your interest, and they don't ever use that ever again, except to sell some treasuries to some rich people because that's the law. They don't use that income for future respending ever. So they are just arbitrarily charging you money to go to school, and will sick debt collectors on you.
Yes,
It's just
yes.
like, it's just like the prophet of the craven evil of what that is. One last comment about
I
means testing,
I
and then I'm going to go
entirely
back.
agree.
Good. So the one last comment about means testing, then I'm going to go back to this article, which is when you don't go universal, and I know you obviously know this, but I just like, this is an insight that I just got recently. When you don't go universal, when you have to fill out a form, that means that there is a certain level of, these people don't get it, these people get it, these people are poor enough, these people are not poor enough. And so this number now has to be managed. This, below 100 number has to be managed. And who makes these decisions of what that number is? Who decides who's poor enough and who's not poor enough? And so this number can be tweaked, and in every crisis is going to be used to take a tiny bit more away from that number.
Yes,
Whereas universal,
it has been.
right, exactly. And Social Security, although they pretend that it's going broke, it's actually, Medicare is 100% for over 65. Social Security is 100% for whatever that age is, over 65. And it is much more difficult to tweak, or to I can't think of the term, to chink the armor of universal programs. So it's just like, means testing is just really bad in so many ways.
Absolutely.
Okay, so back to this article. We're like halfway through already. I don't remember where I left off. Second, we need to make it easier for people to stay home, such as by implementing short-term debt deferments, including on small business and mortgage loans, and suspending utility bills, as some European countries are already doing. Governments also should be providing income support in the form of extended unemployment insurance, food stamps, and housing benefits. In the US, all work requirements for public benefits should be abolished, and the federal government should extend immediate financial assistance to state governments constrained by balanced budget laws because they're currency users. The coronavirus response package recently adopted by the US does not go nearly far enough. As it stands, the legislation will leave 80% of private sector workers without medical paid leave coverage. The provision for free testing offers no solace to those who are already critically ill or will have lost their health insurance because they lost their job. The U.S. should use this occasion to make universal paid leave and Medicare for all permanent policies.
Absolutely.
Another top priority is to provide emergency cash support to households. Talk of a $1,000 disbursement has gotten Americans excited. $2,000 would be better, and of course,
Yep.
Republicans are proposing one time only. And the poor, and if you're below
Not
whatever
all the
70,
Republicans. Actually, not all the Republicans. In other words, that was some talk at first from Trump, but then some other Republicans have been coming out for monthly payments, and some other Republicans have even started talking about the $2,000 a month.
well, that's certainly good, and they know it's going to go to them because we buy stuff from them. $2,000 would be better, but cash assistance alone will not be enough. We have to have things to buy. On the contrary, without the aforementioned provisions to plug the hole in the cratering labor market, much of the cash payout will be wasted. When employment and income prospects are uncertain, sending cash to families is like pouring water into a leaky bucket, which is a great analogy, I think.
Yes, it's again the bathtub analogy, which often is used, by MMT to get people to try to visualize how currency is coming into the system, and how it leaves the system, and the idea, of having enough in it so the system can run, but not having too much in it, so you get inflation.
Right, but this takes the analogy, and it like the bathtub analogy has a controlled spigot for
Right.
federal spending and has a controlled drain. But
Right.
changes that analogy a little bit by a leaky bucket, by its uncontrolled.
Right.
Like there's right. What the U.S. and other countries really need are policies to create good jobs once the crisis has passed. So again, like wartime, we need to give people
what
money
she's talking about here, is the difference between just giving people cash payments, as a basic income, okay, and having the cash payments come through a federal job guarantee. So when they come through a federal job guarantee, what's happening is that they're coming through good jobs. Okay, they're no longer going through a leaky bucket. They're going through good jobs that produce actual value for the community. So when that happens, productivity goes up and you don't have inflation.
Right. And the wartime analogy, um, Sam Levy has a really good paper of the I forget the title, basically war treasury, on how the treasury financed World War II. And it talks a lot about how you need to take away money from people during the war, that when there's pressure to purchase things that are not available during the war. And you also need to prepare them for extra. Once the war ends, we want production, we want spending to increase after the war ends. So we're not just stopping the spending now. We're preparing for when this crisis ends, so that when people start walking out of their homes, that we can start with a running start, and get things going again.
Right. And the way they did this in the Second World War is they sold savings bonds.
Right.
And the
So that we took
savings
their money
bonds
away, but
would
we were going to give it
withdraw
back to them
money out of
afterwards.
the economy during the Second World War. But then, as they were redeemed during the later 1940s and the 1950s, more money was flowing back into the economy so that we would have more spending, so that there would be a more prosperous economy with demand to support the industries of the United States. That's what happened. Those were very prosperous times.
Right. The golden age of capitalism. That's what that was. And actually, I remember Sam's paper is called "Modern Money in the War Treasury," and he talking with him soon after he spoke with MMT podcast about this paper, "Modern Money in the War Treasury." I spoke with him soon after, and he inspired me to create my podcast, Activist MMT. He's episodes 1 and 2. It's really, I just find his paper really interesting. Okay. That's why. So, what the U.S. and other countries really need are policies to create good jobs once the crisis has passed. That's why, after taking all of the steps necessary for today, governments should mobilize again. Only big government, big public investments, and big public employment programs will ensure a quick bounce back, rather than another protracted jobless recovery. In the last crisis, much of the stimulus fueled runaway inequality. This time needs to be different. The situation demands not nudges or incentives, but direct action on the model of the New Deal, the U.S. interstate highway system, and the Apollo program. Governments should use this crisis as an opportunity to launch a bold investment program for clean, green infrastructure as envisioned in the Green New Deal. After all, another viral epidemic is inevitable, and the climate crisis demands FDR-like ambition and resolve.
And who has that? There's only one person on the horizon who has that right now, and we know his name.
Pete Buttigieg.
Okay. Yeah, people judge. Yeah.
um, what was I going to say?
Once the pandemic is behind us.
I can remember. Once this pandemic is behind us, we need to start hiring. Policymakers should already be preparing public service and guaranteed job programs for anyone who shows up at the unemployment office. And that job guarantee should be paired with training and education to help workers qualify for better paid private sector employment when the economy recovers. Until last month, commentators in the US were still talking about labor market slack from the 2008 financial crisis. And despite historically low official unemployment numbers, how long will it take to return to current employment levels after a pandemic that knocks a significant portion of the economy offline. Without direct, guaranteed employment, we are looking at decades of elevated unemployment. Alternatively, a person with a living wage job can pay a mortgage, buy a plane ticket, and go to restaurants. An ample supply of good jobs for all who want them is the surest way to bring every sector of the economy back to full health. I just want to make just a quick aside, which is I will not be, obviously today they're shut down, but I will not be buying takeout or delivery from any restaurant. I'm just not going to do it. I just feel like it's unsafe, and that is a shame for people who own restaurants, our local diner. And so what someone gave me a really great idea. I bought $100 gift certificate from them, and I said, as soon as this is over, we will go in and we will use that $100 gift certificate. That's a way of supporting. That's a way of supporting these businesses who are stuck in this position of I either have to financially get crushed, or I have to jeopardize the health of my community. That's
Yes.
a really horrible position to be put in.
It is.
And it's not their fault.
Yep. But how will the government pay for it all?
Thank you. But how will the government pay for it all? The same way it pays for everything else. It should not take a pandemic or a world war to remind citizens that the U.S. government is self-financing. U.S. public financial institutions, the Treasury, and the U.S. Federal Reserve ensure that all government bills get paid, no questions asked. All that is needed then is for Congress to appropriate the budget and design an effective policy for managing this crisis and those that will come after it, those policies that will come after it. No one is calling for wealthy taxpayers or foreign lenders to pay for the response. That is not how a government that controls its own currency finances itself. So let us stop asking the trivial question of how to pay for it. Finding the money is never the problem. The focus should be on creating good jobs for the unemployed.
Okay, so I think that is a great and relatively brief article. What I would like to do is to underline it with a passage from Stephanie Kelton from the Deconstructed piece. She says, well, I say we're getting a beautiful example of exactly how it works right now. And she's answering the how are we going to pay for it question, okay, which Mehdi Hassan had raised in there. She said, in the span of the last week, Mehdi, Congress has moved first an $8.3 billion piece of legislation. The House and Senate put it through. The president signed it. Those are the instructions that are being sent to the Federal Reserve by Congress to say we're ordering up $8.3 billion. Go make the payments. Okay, that implies, or at least it seems to me to say, that what Congress is doing is sending instructions to the Federal Reserve to have the Federal Reserve go make the payments. Okay, the thing is, the Federal Reserve doesn't make the payments, but I'll go back to that, okay, in just a little while. I want to go a little further into the explanation Stephanie gave. A few days later, the House passed the bill that we were just talking about, $104 billion. Congress passed it. I'm sorry the House passed it. The Senate passed it off. Off it went. Another set of instructions sent to the Federal Reserve. We're ordering up $104 billion to go carry out the payments. Now, the White House is actually negotiating, and it looks like we're going to see a third piece of legislation. This one probably for $1 trillion. So again, Congress is ordering up $1 trillion. The Fed will carry out all those payments. What people mean when they say, oh, Senator Sanders, you want Medicare for all, or you want to make public colleges and universities tuition free. Where is the money going to come from? What that means in Beltway speak is how are you going to offset all of that spending with new revenue from somewhere else, or by spending less in defense or some other category, the budget? In other words, a lot of the time, what happens is that Congress writes a piece of legislation ordering up, let's say, 50 billion. But then they pair that legislation with another set of instructions that says to you, the Fed, when you clear these payments for 50 billion, we also want you to take 50 billion away from people in the form of higher taxes. So you can give two sets of instructions, and that's what Congress usually means when they say, how are you going to pay for it? It means how are you going to offset every dollar of new spending with, let's say, a dollar of new revenue. But what we've seen in the last week is that you can send just one set of instructions. You can just tell the Fed you're ordering up the dollars, but you're not subtracting any anyway. And so I know, okay, many says, that blows a lot of people's minds. They say, quote, wait a minute, what about deficits? How about the debt? Aren't we going to have to pay all this back? And Steph says, so here's the thing. When you do a piece of legislation that's paid for, it means you're putting the 50 billion in and it goes to some parts of the economy, and you're taking 50 billion out of other parts of the economy so that you're not deficit spending. What Congress has done in the span of the last week, let's say, is commit to spending dollars into the economy without taking any back out. So it's doing deficit spending. And we've been so badly educated to respond to that sort of financing as something that's fiscally irresponsible, reckless, dangerous, whatever the case may be, it isn't. The government is committing to dropping dollars into the economy without ripping them right back out again. It's exactly what we want them to do right now. And of course, Stephanie is very, very right about that. But there's something misleading in how she describes it. Okay. And the way it's misleading is this. Yes, the payments go out from the Federal Reserve, but they go out from the Federal Reserve because the Treasury Department is issuing instructions to the Federal Reserve to wire money or write checks to particular people or companies or institutions in the private sector. Okay, or perhaps to other states if they're sending money to other states. So these instructions are coming from the Treasury. So technically, it's the Treasury that is paying the bills. Okay, now how does Treasury pay the bills? It pays the bills, it keeps on paying the bills as long as it has a balance in the Treasury spending account. So the answer to how are we going to pay for it is always the same. It's the Treasury Department that has to pay for it, working through the Federal Reserve as the banking agent of the Treasury Department. Congress is not, in fact, ordering the Federal Reserve to pay for it. It is ordering the Treasury to pay for it. It is mandating the Treasury to pay for it. So the real question that has to be asked is not how we going to pay for it or how the Fed is going to pay for it. It's how is the Treasury going to get more money into the Treasury spending account? And here's where the problem starts to come in. Nowadays, what generally happens is that Treasury gets more money into the Treasury spending account through tax revenues that come in. The tax revenues are then destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the settlement process. This is according to Stephanie Kelton's own classic paper, which we both are very familiar with. And then the Federal Reserve credits the Treasury spending account with entirely new credits. that it creates out of thin air. So yes, the Federal Reserve is topping up the Treasury spending account, but the topping up does not go out until Treasury obeys the orders of Congress to spend. Okay, so that's a key thing to explain. How else does money get into the Treasury spending account? Well, the other way is through selling Treasury securities. Okay, and when the Treasury securities are sold, then that money comes into the Treasury Department, is deposited at the Fed. In the settlement process, the bond sale money, the security sale money, is again destroyed. And the Federal Reserve creates entirely new money to put into the Treasury spending account. Well, is it necessary that this account be topped up only through what happens after tax revenue is deposited, or what happens after bond sale revenue, okay, is actually deposited? And the answer is no. Okay, it's not. But that is to say, Congress can provide for methods where the Fed is directly ordered, where it's given instructions to place, in this case, the example was 8.3 billion, to place the 8.3 billion directly into the Treasury spending account after the appropriation. When the appropriation is made, there needs to be an order in the appropriation. Federal Reserve, create the 8.3 billion out of thin air, give the 8.3 billion to the Treasury spending account. Or in the case of the 104 billion, the same thing is necessary. What should happen is that the Federal Reserve is ordered by the Congress to put the 104 billion into the Treasury spending account. Okay, and then if Congress also wants to have in separate bills the Treasury Department taxing away part of the money that is being spent into the economy, then that should be done through a separate bill, because it's still the Treasury Department who has to go through the mandated instructions to tax people. It's not the Federal Reserve that taxes people. They may settle the transactions, but they don't do the actual taxing. Okay, so what
they don't do the actual taxing, and they also don't do the actual spending.
Is that she's oversimplified it, and she's made it look like everything is done by the Fed, the spending and also the taxing. And that is not what happens. And when people ask the question, how are you going to pay for it? Okay, what they're asking is they want you to give them an answer of who you're going to tax so that you can get the Treasury spending account topped up, or who you're going to borrow from to get the Treasury spending account topped up. But it is not within their realm, okay, of understanding that those are the only two ways to get the Treasury spending account actually topped up. And what Stephanie has to start explaining at some point in time is something she very well knows. Everybody in MMT very well knows that. And that is, at some point, the Congress has to give the orders to the Federal Reserve to create the money out of thin air, with having nothing necessarily to do with borrowing or taxing. Those should be completely separate operations for the purpose of draining the reserves out of the Treasury spending account. And of
Can I ask
course,
you a question on that?
I've outlined a way that that can happen, and that is through what I've called overt congressional financing. Yes, you can ask me a question about that.
I'm just not understanding the Treasury spending account. What's it called? Treasury spending account? That what it's called?
It's called the Treasury General Account.
Treasury General account.
Yes, but there is an account at the New York Fed that's called the Treasury General Account that most of the Treasury spending goes out of.
Okay, my question is, what I'm not understanding is Congress passes a bill which triggers the Treasury to do something, which triggers the Fed to fill in the Treasury General account or spending account. Sorry, I forget the name.
All right, but
What I
right
don't.
now it only fills up the Treasury General Account, okay, according to certain business rules. And those business rules have to do with bank settlements involving deposits of tax revenues and deposits, okay, of bond revenue. Okay, and
What
that,
I'm not. What,
I'm
what
sorry.
I'm not what I'm not understanding is, you said that this pathway of basically Congress to Treasury to the Federal Reserve, like that's the mechanics of it. That Federal Reserve pay pays the Treasury for. I don't. I'm missing the terminology here, but the Treasury does the spending through their treasuries by creating treasuries, and then the Fed funds those treasuries with money. What I don't understand is the amount that Treasury General account, the spending account, whatever that terminology is like, say it's $100 billion in spending, so the Treasury creates $100 trillion in $100 billion in treasuries. The Fed fills that up with money, those accounts with money. What I don't understand is that spending account. Does the Treasury create those treasuries at first of a specific amount? So does the Treasury create $100 billion in treasuries, and then the Fed is obligated to top off those accounts with that amount of money? Is that how it works?
No, but the way it works is that the Treasury creates the securities. Then the Fed holds an auction, okay, and the securities are generally sold to brokers who have essentially licenses. There are 20 brokers, okay, who are authorized to bid, okay, at the auctions. They're required to actually bid, okay, at the auctions. And these brokers actually ensure that the auctions are always going to be successful and are always going to be sold out. Okay, so that the Treasury will sell out all of its securities. And the way this is fixed is that these brokers, okay, are making money from every Treasury sale. So it's a source, okay, of revenue for them. And they're largely the big banks, okay, who are the brokers. The Wells Fargos of the world and the other big banks. Okay, and so they know that if they're going to continue to operate as dealer brokers, standing in between the Treasury Department, the Fed, okay, and the community of people and companies that are buying the Treasury securities, they first have to buy the securities themselves, and then they have to resell them to the larger public, and that's how they get their cut of the deal. Okay, now the Fed makes sure, okay, it makes sure that they're always going to be able to buy these Treasury securities. And the
Who's
way it
they?
makes
Who's they? That pronoun you said they will be able to buy those treasuries. Is that the bidders?
the dealer brokers
Okay.
who are bidding at the auction, they will
Okay.
always be able to afford to buy the Treasury securities simply because if they're short of money, okay, or liquidity at some point in time, and they can't afford to actually make the purpose, then the Fed offers them an extremely low interest loan to borrow the money necessary to buy those securities. So it's all fixed.
So these
I mean,
securities
all
are
deal
not
is
funded
fixed.
when they're put onto auction. They're not yet funded. When they're first put onto auction to
They're
these dealers,
first
they're
put
not
up to
yet funded.
auction. When they're first put up to auction, they are not yet funded. They're not
Okay, so
funded until the dealer brokers, okay, or people or companies actually buy the Treasury securities. The companies are the purchasers of the Treasury securities.
so so the Federal Reserve does not create money until, or issue currency, fill these reserves, fill these treasuries, until a dealer cannot purchase these bonds, and at which point they will give these dealers low interest loans in order to purchase these bonds. Is that right?
Right. Okay, but actually, most of the time, they do not make such loans because it's fairly routine. Okay, and the banks have the money to purchase the bonds. Okay, from the auctions. Now, when the bond money, okay, is collected by the Fed, exactly the same thing happens as happens with taxes. That money gets destroyed in the bank settlement process, and the Federal Reserve then creates entirely new money out of thin air to top up the Treasury General account.
Okay. This is getting into more general stuff, and I'm not even sure of what the questions are, but I'm going to ask one more. Just going to ask one more, and then so these dealers purchase these. So the treasuries are issued. The securities are issued by the Treasury. They're put onto auction, and then the public, through these dealers or through secondary or whatever, purchase these treasuries using their own money. And so the money that fills in the Treasury general account, spending account, comes from the public, comes from the private sector, comes from currency issuers.
No. It's the same thing as tax money. Okay, in other words, the tax money comes from the public, then is destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the process of settlement before that money actually goes into the Treasury General account. The same is true with the bond revenue.
So they accept it, it disappears, and then that whatever amount was accepted as the purchasing is the same amount that's put into the Treasury account.
It's the same amount that is created anew by the Federal Reserve Bank.
Oh my gosh!
The Treasury spending account.
So this is just a labyrinth of excuses. So people do, from their point of view, do purchase these treasuries. But what's actually happening is that, you know what? Okay. Ridiculous. This is what it always reminds me of. There is my favorite episode of The Simpsons.
Okay? I'm sorry, your favorite episode of what?
The Simpsons. Trust me. My favorite episode of The Simpsons is a half of an episode of, it's the chili festival. So Homer is incredibly excited to go to this chili festival. Okay? So he goes to this chili festival with Marge, and this is the same episode where Marge says, "Oregano, what the hell?" Or oregano. Oregano. And so Homer gets the hottest. Trust me, this is actually connected. Homer gets the hottest. It like dissolves metal. It dissolves steel. And he wants to have this chili, and so he eats the chili, and his mouth catches on fire, and he starts panicking, and he runs around and he tries to find whatever. Like he finds an entire tray of beer, like this guy's walking around as if in a stadium, the tray of beer, and he pours the whole tray into his mouth, and then he finds a kid eating ice cream. He rips the ice cream cone out of that kid's hand. And he takes that ice cream cone and he shoves it into his mouth as fast as he possibly can. And this is the part. So the camera zooms in on his tongue. Okay?
Yeah.
And it slows down. And you see the ice cream approaching his tongue, which he's doing at high speed, but the camera slows down. So the ice cream is approaching his tongue, and you're like, zoomed in to you can see very close. Within a millimeter of his tongue, the ice cream vaporizes.
Yeah.
Okay? Ice cream completely vaporizes. It never touches his tongue. Okay? So this is exactly what this is doing here. So these bond issuers purchase these bonds, purchase these treasuries, they give their money, it disappears. And then whatever amount that they just paid that is now gone, that is the amount that now the Federal Reserve is legally obligated or allowed to populate into the Treasury's general account.
Yes.
So it disappears, but that is the amount that the Federal Reserve is allowed to create, which populates the Treasury's general account, right?
Right. Okay. And if you read that critical page in Stephanie Kelton's paper, "Can Taxes and Bonds Finance Public Spending?" Okay. you will find that she says, okay, she says that the bond money and the tax money isn't the money, can't possibly be the money that goes into the Treasury account. It can't possibly be the money that
Right.
Treasury uses to spend.
Collection of taxes implies their destruction. It implies their destruction. That's what her paper says.
That's what a paper
Okay,
says.
so
But not
the
just
one
the
thing I'm
collection of taxes. The sale of bonds implies the destruction of the bond revenue. Okay.
all
In other words, when you sell bonds, it's just another way of draining reserves out of the private sector. When you tax, it's another method for draining reserves. They're both reserve drains. That's what you got to keep in mind.
the one thing I'm not understanding though is in this scenario of what you just said, all money comes from the currency users. I understand it doesn't actually flow through; it's destroyed and whatever. But all of it comes from currency users. So
No,
where is
all of it comes from the Fed. Well, okay, not
but yeah,
all of
no,
it.
no, okay, no. But let me clarify. I understand what you mean. So the Fed is given permission to issue whatever that revenue is, just an arbitrary rule. But it is, but the Federal Reserve is only creating its revenue. It's only creating the amount that it collects in revenue. So what part of this process, and maybe we could talk about this more on Monday, which now I'm excited to talk about on Monday again. So the revenue comes in, and that's the amount that the Fed creates after destroying this. But the it's what is the scenario where the Fed can issue currency without income, without collecting revenue?
Okay. Uh, at various times in our history, for example, in the Civil War with Lincoln, okay, in greenbacks, the federal government issued money without taxing anybody. Okay, in World War II, okay, in World War II, I think there were occasions when the Federal Reserve actually created money under orders from the Congress without actually having any taxes in the same amount going on at the same time or any bond sales, okay, going on at the same time. There was also, okay, another period uh, when John Kennedy, in the early days of his presidency, tried to issue, or he did issue, I think, for a while, some money based on, I think it was called silver certificates or something like that. It was a form of currency that was directly issued by the Treasury. Okay, I don't know whether that in any way corresponded to taxes, but he was looking to use the power of the Congress to create money through the Treasury Department, as opposed to only going through the Federal Reserve. I forget what the exact story of that was now, but there was a period in the early days of the Kennedy presidency where that was done. And there are some wild theories that say the real reason why Kennedy was assassinated was because he was trying to do that. The crazy nuts with their theories of money, the far-fetched theories. Anyway, that was one of the theories, that was the crime that JFK really committed that caused people to want to assassinate him. But that's I
Okay.
think, a far-fetched kind of story. But what is not
Okay.
far-fetched, I think, is that he created some money without it corresponding to either tax revenues or bond revenues, okay, in any way. Okay, now, for the most part, okay, the way new money is actually created is that the Fed actually creates it and then distributes it into the economy in return, okay, for assets. In other words, when it does its asset swabs, swaps, or it's quantitative easing, okay, or stuff like that. It's doing those swaps but based on the value of the securities that it's buying from the private sector. Now, it doesn't only buy bonds that were federally issued. It buys, for example, some mortgage securities, okay, as well. Uh, it buys sometimes, I think, the securities of insurance companies, okay, from time to time. In other words, it can buy securities that are issued by the private sector. What is the value of those particular securities? Well, the value of those securities is actually problematic because the private companies are issuing securities with a particular value on them, and then the Fed is buying them. Whether those particular securities actually have a market value in federal dollars is actually determined by the Fed itself. When it moves to buy those securities, it basically legitimates the market value which the private sector, okay, has placed upon them. So
Hmm.
in that instance, it's creating new money ostensibly, okay, as a swap, asset for asset, but in fact, the value of those securities was originally arbitrarily set by the private sector companies, and so they may be getting considerable profit over the out of those supposed swaps. And I think that's one of the ways in which, but new money gets into the economy. The other way, okay, in which it gets into the economy is through deficit spending. Okay, because what happens is that even though deficit spending, when okay it occurs, okay, is initially backed, by bond sales, one day those bonds mature, and when they mature, the Treasury Department has to pay back the principal value of the debt instruments. So that money gets right back into the economy. So over time, the deficits of the federal government are actually creating new money in the economy. And that, okay, is much of the reason why the money supply has been expanding over a period of time, okay, because eventually the Fed uh, has to fund the new money, okay, in some way, okay, and the way it basically does that is that there's a liquidity shortage of some sort, and the Federal Reserve gets scared that the system is going to freeze up, because there's a liquidity shortage. So then it creates new money and then swaps that new money for assets supposedly at face value that are coming from the private banks. But over time, this process has the effect of new money filtering into the economy that really came about as the result of the federal deficit spending. And so the supply of money grows gradually over time until the supply of money today, let's say, in 2020 is far greater than it was in 1995, let us say.
So if I believe the money, I believe the money supply is the national debt plus all bank created money. Is that, I believe that's correct, right?
Well, that's true in relation to, uh, okay, there are different types of money. There's M1, there's M2, there's M3, okay, and so on. Okay. So the money supply can be broken into different components. Okay. So the issue is uh, what is the hard money? in the economy. If you recall Stephanie Kelton's paper, okay, on the hierarchy, okay, of money,
Okay.
there's a certain part, okay, of the money supply, which is basically hard money that was actually created by the Fed, okay, or by Treasury deficit spending. And I forget whether that's known as M1, okay, or M2, okay, I forget now. But
Okay.
that pot of money is not all the money that's out there because there's lots and lots of bank created money, which
Right.
that money, okay, is backing.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so you
Okay.
know that.
Okay. 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 All right. Um, unless there's any closing stuff that you have, we've been going for quite a while, and I'm going to be seeing you again in a couple of days. So perhaps this is a good
Yeah,
time
we'll
to.
be going. Okay, folks, we're sorry
If
we.
I may, before we stop, if I may, before we stop, I just want to give a little plug. I'm going to put into the comments, and I'm just going to say, if you don't mind, I'm just going to give a little plug for my own podcast,
Oh,
which is
that's fine.
MM,
That's fine. Please feel free to do
Act,
that.
Activist MMT, which is on Facebook and Twitter, a podcast. Just released episodes 18 and 19, which were with you from January of last year. We spoke about monetary reform. You know, I look forward to talking with you again. We're going to talk about just general stuff. I want to interview you, just about you, and then we can go more into depth into these more general questions because I have quite a few of them. Um,
I suppose so.
I I do. I mean, you're very knowledgeable on these technical things, which is something that I'm missing. I'm really missing that. I read recently. I read Eric Timoin's 2014
Oh, yeah, that's really
Interrelations.
great.
Yeah, which basically is the main point of the paper that I took out of it was that you can just think of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve as a black box, that they just work together. You know the intricacies of looking into that black box, which is really wonderful. But it is safe to basically consider these as the same thing. That's the point that I got,
It isn't
out of that
safe.
paper.
It isn't safe actually from a legal point of view. And the reason why it's not safe actually from a legal point of view, okay, is because there's the debt ceiling law.
Yeah, of course, there's human created stupid stuff that that
There are
that
human
changes it because
created constraints that have very real practical results in practical politics when you look at the
okay.
political side of this, and that have
But
economic
they
impact also, because the debt ceiling crises cost money.
right.
Uh,
It's a crisis they choose to create. When it comes down to it, and like in this coronavirus crisis, those things are easily changed, which
right,
is
but
another point of the
it's
paper. Which is
part,
another point of the paper.
those are easily changed. But this whole regime is part of austerity politics. Over time, it's become but designed to put roadblocks in the way of federal spending for real people.
Of course. Oh yeah, no, no. Of course,
That's
of
the way
course.
it's functioned.
Right.
Okay, and a lot
Which
of
is the whole point of our
the
conversation
damn pay
tonight.
go rule.
Right. Which is the whole point of our conversation tonight. We know the right things to do. This corrupt Congress is not going to do them. I mean, to some extent, they will for some because they will catch this virus from the disadvantaged. They will lose a lot of workers and a lot of purchasers from this virus. So they do have to help us to some extent, but not nearly to the extent that we know that needs to be done. And Bernie says needs to be done, and MMT economist says it needs to be done. But um, yeah,
Okay, so folks, there's still 23 of you here, which is great. And thank you for hanging on for so long. Tonight, we won't have time to go over the comments. They've been very, very good comments, I think, and there's a raft of them. And we'll be reading them when we go offline, and we may take up some of the themes from the comments because we're coming back, okay, on Monday, the two of us, not to talk about the coronavirus this time and the impact, okay, of MMT on the coronavirus. By now, okay, you understand the very, 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 very heavy impact because the key to solving the coronavirus problem, at least the economic side, okay, of that problem, okay, is uh, to use the insights, okay, of MMT to do the spending that is necessary, okay, for all of us. So, okay, I think we want to make that point, but we also want to say we'll be back at 9 p.m., okay, on Monday night, and then that will be a pure MMT program, okay. And so, Jeff,
There's
yeah, go on, Jeff.
I just number one, I'm looking forward to talking with you again on Monday. And there's one comment I just want to address in that was given to us tonight, and that is just simply someone worrying of I've lost where it is, so I'm going to summarize as best I can. But basically, worrying if someone gets the coronavirus, are they then and they survive, they get through it, are they then immune to the coronavirus going forward? And my instinct is just, I don't know this for sure, but my instinct is that every cold you get, which is a virus, you are then immune to that cold going forward. You can get a different cold, but you are immune to the particular cold that you have. I believe that that's the case. But
Okay, I'm not sure the facts with colds, but I've been listening to a lot of streams on the virus, okay, on the coronavirus from people who are authoritative. In particular, my favorite streamer is John W. Campbell, okay, who's a streamer from the UK. He's a physician there, okay, and an epidemiologist. And each morning he has a program on the coronavirus, okay, on YouTube. And it's always great, okay, it's always up to date, okay, and it's up to date with the latest of scientific information that comes out on the virus, okay, as well. And what I've heard there is that the current opinion, now there's still a lot of things they don't know about the virus, okay, but what he says is that the current general opinion in the scientific community is that if you're really cured of the virus the first time around, in other words, if you actually fully recover from the virus, that you're probably going to have immunity for the fairly long term, okay, probably for at least a year and perhaps for more, and it may even be lifetime immunity from the virus. So you cannot catch it again. Now, there have been some cases of people who were ill with it and who appeared to get well, okay, and who then had a recurrence. Now, by the doctors who examined them and the scientific work that's been done on them, the opinion is that they failed to fully recover from the virus the first time. So that is
right.
the opinion, okay, about that. So some news is
And people
going
are saying in the
around.
comments, and people are saying in the comments that it could also mutate. But I do just want to say one last thing, which is I interviewed this doctor on Monday, and hopefully it's going to be released any day now. And he said that there it is very likely that within a year to 18 months time that we will have a vaccine, a mass-produced vaccine. And I did not ask him about mutations, but from my impression of how he said it to me, that we should feel reasonably confident that there will be a vaccine to help us in the next, when this happens, like the next season, the next go round.
Yes, I think that is probable, but I also think that as with the flu, we can expect that there are going to be variations, okay, and also that okay, it's going to mutate, okay, in various ways, and that so consequently the vaccines are probably going to have to be updated in the same way the flu vaccines are. At least
Sure.
I've heard this opinion uh, expressed. But the good news is that the fatality rate from the coronavirus uh, is likely to stabilize at some level. We don't know what the stabilization is going to be, but if we look at it as a matter of the species, when it does stabilize, it will probably be at a low enough level for our species to survive. And I
Right.
sincerely hope it's going to be a fatality rate of way under 1%. I don't know if it'll get down to the fatality rate of the flu, which I believe right now is roughly 0.1% or something like that. But I don't know. I can't even estimate that. I don't think enough is known about it, and I don't know enough about it, Kate, to be able to estimate. I do know that in South Korea, the fatality rate has gotten down to from 0.6% to 0.7%. Okay, and in China, also similar results have been gotten. Those are two nations, of course, where they've taken rather draconian measures to control the virus.
And as of at least a couple of days ago, Italy is finally leveling off on their number of cases, which is good. So,
Which
okay,
is
Joe.
very good.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for coming, Jeff.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having
Okay.
me. Yeah, this was I love, we're just, we go all over the place, and that's great. That's great. Thank
Yes,
you.
I think so too. And so thank you. Okay, and Bonnie says
NOV.
NOV or COV?
And yeah, and COV. And COV.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, there's a website. It's called N small n COV 2019 dot live. Okay, and that's a website that was constructed by Avi Schiffman, who's a precocious but 17-year-old. He's a programmer, and he started the site in December, okay, of last year with cases from China, but now he gathers data, okay, from all over the world, and
NOV what?
okay, it's N small n capital COV 2019 dot live, LIVE.
Okay, I put it in the comments.
Okay, and that site, okay, is very easy to look at. He designed it, okay, in a very intelligent way, and it's a source, okay, of great information, and it's cross national, okay, and in the United States, at least, it goes down to the state level, so it's it's very useful as a site to keep track of what's happening, okay, with the virus. Okay, so
Great.
everybody, once again, we'll be back on Monday at about 9 p.m. and the discussion will focus then mostly on MMT.
Everybody, please stay safe. Joe, stay safe. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you in a couple of days.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay, I think I said it would be Monday night, right, at 9 o'clock. I just want to double
Monday night
verify.
at 9 o'clock. Monday
It's going to
night
be
at 9
Monday
o'clock.
night, okay, at 9 o'clock. So good night,
Yes, and not.
everybody. Thanks for hanging in there.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.